power has always been the easiest illusion to sell. Everyone wants to believe they're in control. Kings, gods, heroes, it doesn't matter. What matters is the story they tell themselves. That strength means dominance, that leadership means command, and that losing control means weakness. Ragnarok takes that story, burns it, and laughs while it turns to ash. At the start of the film, Thor thinks he's the perfect god. A warrior with a hammer, a savior with a purpose, a son who's learned from his father. But in less than 10 minutes, the movie strips all of that away. His hammer shatters, his kingdom collapses, his family betrays him. He becomes a joke in a gladiator arena, a god chained and humiliated in front of mortals. And yet, that's where the film begins to make its point. Because Ragnarok isn't about the end of Asgard, it's about the end of power itself. What happens when you realize that every symbol, every title, every weapon you've ever relied on was never the source of your strength? It's about what's left of a god when you take away everything that makes him feel like one. In a world full of heroes chasing control, Ragnarok is the rare story that celebrates losing it. From the very beginning, Thor believes that power means control. He thinks that because he wields a hammer, because he's a hero, because people rely on him, he truly understands strength. But the entire path of Ragnarok is designed like a test, meant to show him that none of it is real. The hammer is just a tool, not a source. The crown is only a title, not meaning. Even his family, his legacy, they're just chains that taught him how to think, how to act, how to obey an image of himself. When Hela appears and destroys the hammer in seconds, that moment isn't about losing a weapon, it's about watching the image of a god collapse. Up until that scene, Thor believed Mjölnir was the reason he couldn't be defeated. But when the hammer shatters, it's like his identity breaks with it. What's clever is how the film hides tragedy behind humor. The smiles, the jokes, the fast pacing, all of it covers something heavier. The death of power. You laugh, but you're watching a hero fall apart. In this part of the film, Thor is still searching for something external to define him. He's chasing tools, symbols, something to have. But Ragnarok's message is simple. Real power isn't something you hold. It's what remains after everything you hold is gone. What makes Ragnarok different from almost every other Marvel movie is how it turns weakness into spectacle. Most stories about gods and heroes treat failure as something tragic, a moment to rebuild and rise again. But here, weakness becomes entertainment. Every loss is followed by a joke, every humiliation played for laughs. It's the kind of comedy that hides pain so well, you forget it's there. Thor gets electrocuted, knocked out, thrown across rooms, smashed by the Hulk, mocked by Loki, and insulted by mortals. Yet none of these scenes feel like suffering, they feel like rhythm. It's all movement, chaos, noise. The audience laughs, the music hits, and for a second you think power still exists. But that's the trick. The laughter isn't healing anything, it's distracting you from the collapse. Taika Waititi builds the entire movie on this contrast. The idea that laughter can be a mask for destruction. The brighter the colors, the faster the jokes, the more obvious it becomes that something is deeply broken underneath. When everything turns into a punchline, power stops meaning anything. Because power only works when people take it seriously. There's a moment where Thor screams at the Grandmaster, demanding freedom, and instead of anger, the scene turns into absurdity. The god of thunder begging for release while the crowd cheers like it's a game. That's when Ragnarok makes its cruelest joke. Even gods are slaves to the systems that amuse mortals. The film keeps making you laugh while stripping every symbol of strength away. The hammer, the throne, the titles, the respect. Until what's left is just a man, desperate to remember what made him worthy in the first place. Every story about gods eventually reaches a point where destruction becomes inevitable. But in Thor, Ragnarok, destruction isn't punishment, it's liberation. The entire film builds toward the realization that power, no matter how divine, always leads to decay when it tries to preserve itself. The more Thor fights to hold on to what he calls strength, his hammer, his home, his role, the faster he loses them. The film turns that loss into a pattern, repeating it over and over until the audience finally understands. Maybe the only way to protect something sacred is to let it burn. Odin's death isn't an ending, it's a transfer. The father who wants to find Thor's worth dies without ceremony, reminding him that leadership isn't inherited, it's chosen. For the first time, Thor has no one left to impress, no object to rely on, no throne to climb. And in that emptiness, in that complete collapse of structure, he finds clarity. The moment Thor realizes that his power doesn't come from Mjölnir but from himself isn't a grand revelation. It's quiet, almost meditative. He sees his father not as a god but as a mirror, a man who also had to let go of everything to keep his people alive. That's when Thor stops being a hero trying to win and becomes a leader willing to lose. What's beautiful about Ragnarok is that it doesn't glorify destruction for its own sake. The fire that consumes Asgard isn't chaos, it's balance. It's a reminder that endings aren't failures, they're necessary. Taika Waititi doesn't film the apocalypse as tragedy. He films it as a release. The colors explode, the music rises, and as the world burns, the characters breathe for the first time. By the time Surtur destroys Asgard, Thor has already let it go. That's why the destruction feels peaceful, almost sacred. Because power, in the end, was never about control or survival. It was about surrender. Ragnarok teaches that freedom doesn't come from defeating enemies. It comes from defeating the illusion that you ever could. Thor wins not because he destroys his enemy, but because he accepts destruction as part of the cycle. He becomes a god not of conquest, but of renewal. When everything you've built turns to ash, what remains isn't weakness, it's truth. And the truth is this: sometimes to protect what matters, you have to let it die. By the end of Ragnarok, Thor loses everything that ever made him feel like a god. The hammer, gone. His father, gone. His home, gone. Even his look, the long hair, the royal armor, all of it stripped away. But what's left isn't emptiness, it's clarity. For the first time, Thor isn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He's not trying to be the strongest, or the best, or the perfect son. He's just himself. And that's exactly what makes him powerful again. Because here's the thing about power. It's addictive. It gives you a purpose, then slowly takes it away. It makes you believe that without the weapon, or the title, or the fame, you're nothing. And Ragnarok breaks that illusion in the loudest, funniest, most chaotic way possible. Thor stops being the god of thunder the moment he realizes he doesn't need the hammer to call the storm. He doesn't need a crown to lead. He doesn't need a perfect world to protect people. He just needs to show up, broken, unsure, human, and still choose to fight. That's why this story hits harder than it looks, because deep down, it's not about gods or monsters or saving the universe. It's about something way more real. Losing everything that made you feel special, and realizing you're still enough without it. Asgard burns, but it's not a tragedy. It's a clean slate. It's life reminding you that endings are just the start of something new. The fire isn't destroying Thor. It's burning away everything fake about him. By the end, when he looks at his people, tired, scared, but alive, you can see it in his face. He's not their god anymore, he's one of them. And that's the whole point. Power dies here. The ego, the image, the need to prove something, gone. What's left is a leader. Someone who knows that power isn't about control, it's about connection. And maybe that's what being a god was supposed to mean all along. Because when everything's gone, the weapon, the fame, the fear, what's left isn't weakness, it's freedom. And that's how Thor finally becomes worthy, without ever trying to be.